Shit. That didn't come out. Okay. Well, it's live television, folks. So I just lost my camera and I got it back. So we are live here on YouTube. This is Rich Lieberman. And you just saw, most of you at least, the president talk about today's sort of in a Monday's semi-historic decision regarding presidential immunity, and it was really a response to, most presidents don't talk about Supreme Court decisions on live television, but this is a difference. So I decided to watch. We all watched. Most of you have watched. And I wanted to get some analysis, not just on that, but on the president, Joe Biden himself. This has not been the best of weeks, or at least the late part of the week for Joe Biden. So I contacted my good friend. He's a presidential historian. You've heard him on KGO radio. If you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, he's also lectured. He has written books. And we welcome to the Rich Lieberman show here former KGO, and as I mentioned, political analyst John Rothmann. How are you, John?
Very well.
Good.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's great to have you on. So, look, we watched the debate. We'll get to that in a second. I can't believe they're making a big analysis. What was it, about 2 minutes long? It wasn't even an address. It was more just like a statement on the Monday Supreme Court decision involving presidential immunity and all that. We'll get to that in a second, but let's get to the main, shall we say, the lead. Let's not bury it. Biden had a rough night. We all agree on that. Did this short little statement at the very beginning, at least, did this take away any of the negative impact of Thursday night's really tough evening for the president?
No, I don't think it did. But what it is doing is drawing the lines for Joe Biden. He is going to wage an aggressive campaign against Donald Trump, and he's going to use the Supreme Court decision and President Trump's own actions against him. That is the strategy of the Biden campaign.
Now, I mentioned to you, from a purely political standpoint, and he's got advisors. Every president has political advisors, John, that my suggestion was that he go one-on-one, whether it was with 60 Minutes or so-called friendly media, like somebody like, pick somebody. I mentioned Scott Pelley, or maybe even, believe it or not, a Chris Wallace, who generally likes his policies. One of his biggest critics the other night, was Wallace, but it was sort of based upon that performance, or in this case, lack thereof. What do you think about him doing like a 60 Minutes, a one-on-one, or with a Stephanopoulos or something like that?
He will. There's no question
Yes.
about it. I know you suggested it right off the top, and that is exactly what Joe Biden is going to do. But remember that we have a long way to go until November 5th. And Joe Biden's goal will be to establish the fact that he really is in charge, that he really can deliver the goods. And he's going to make that case repeatedly. And it's not just his record of 3.5 years. It will be how he articulates in the next 3-4 months leading up to the election.
What do you make of, I know you watched the debate and you were disappointed. I didn't think, John, that it was, I've seen this before. He's of course he's old. He's not young, obviously. He's not old. I think he still has the mental faculties. I'm not crazy with some of his political decisions. I've been very critical of what's happened in Israel and his response to what's happening in Gaza. And I thought he wasn't as emphatically pro-Israel as he could have been. But put that aside. As for his mental faculties and his ability to operate as the chief executive and all that, do you still think he's up to the job? Do you think Thursday night is the beginning of the end? Or do you think it's a long way and that he'll persevere and that we'll see Joe Biden as the president versus Donald Trump in the general election?
That's exactly what will happen. Joe Biden intends to run. The Democratic Party is locked in because Biden controls the delegates. know the answer to that question at this point, but every indication from the Biden people is that he intends to run. And one of the things that occurred to me, Rich, is Ronald Reagan had a very bad night in the first debate with Walter Mondale.
Yep.
If you remember,
I remember vividly. Absolutely.
His closing statement was dreadful.
Yeah.
And the Democrats believed at the time that it would give them a shot at really beating Ronald Reagan. But remember, in the second debate, it was turned around.
Right.
And Reagan won it hands down. So there's a long way to go. And one of the things that will be interesting for me to observe and for you to observe is whether Biden can meet these tests. And they are now tests. Let me also point out that the Democrats are going to go after Donald Trump. After all, his debate performance was not stellar in the fact that he made so many misstatements, over 30.
Right.
But remember, what people were judging was not what was coming out of their mouths, but how they looked, how they appeared. And that is an obstacle for Joe Biden. He is 81 years old, and he looks his age, and that is a problem. Now, Donald Trump is younger, but he projects a more dynamic image. So what we saw this afternoon from the White House is Joe Biden trying to make it clear that he is not Donald Trump, that he is the antithesis of Donald Trump. And the most powerful line, the one that will be repeated repeatedly, I think, is the fact that Biden said he dissents from the decision. And that's going to be important.
I was actually watching all the channels today. Joe Fetterman, the senator from Pennsylvania, who himself had a stroke, offered the fact that this, he'd say it outright, that it could be in some way, it could be some people who, are sympathetic to Biden. It might be people that would vote for him still. But I saw that. And then I also saw a congresswoman from Michigan. And so I haven't seen, right. And I haven't seen anybody come out, any name representative politician come out and say, hey, Biden, you got to go. So
no Democrat
no,
say that.
No, they're not going to say it.
Let me tell you what they're going to do now is do polling. Let me give you the out that Biden created. Biden said if the polling shows that I'm a drag on the ticket, then I would have to rethink. So what everyone is now waiting for are the results of the latest polls. How will Biden do? But of course, let me remind you that at this point in 1948, people were calling for Harry Truman to get out because he couldn't win. And Truman ran that kind of aggressive, vigorous campaign, which is what Joe Biden, no matter what, is going to have to do.
Yeah, and you mentioned the I vividly remember the Reagan debate. In fact, the second debate, it was almost like if he showed up and was not drooling, it was a win. Remember, there were people that were saying, all Reagan has to do, and he ended up, by the way, he not only won that debate, he won that election by a landslide over
49 states.
Right, over Mondale. Right. Real quick. So I still see this, and we've talked. I have been very critical of Biden, but this is June. I mentioned earlier in the day some people, and you know this. A lot of people are on vacation. A lot of people did watch that debate, but people are distracted. Frankly, it's we're 4 months out, and that sounds like a long time, but it really isn't. But that if this were going to happen, the fact that it happened in late June, and I still believe, and I may be wrong, you can concur or not, that ultimately this is a referendum on Donald Trump. And I ultimately believe that these legal entanglements, the fact that he's was a sitting president, being tried and convicted on 34 felony counts, ultimately that will play a significant part in the election. Am I right or wrong?
That's the Democratic playbook. The
Yeah.
Democratic playbook is he's a convicted felon. He has no business in the Oval Office. And the argument that Joe Biden made today is that it's wrong that he is not going to go on trial for what happened on January 6th before the election. And may I say, I concur in that. There has been plenty of time for this to be adjudicated. The question is, do the American people care? And so the blunt fact that I think is the Trump supporters do not care. They don't care. They believe he's president
Yep.
no matter what. And that's going to be the challenge. Look, you saw Steve Bannon reporting from prison today.
I did.
Defiant as ever. Defiant as ever.
Almost proud.
Yeah, not almost. He was proud.
Yeah.
And so the thing that worries me the most is if Donald Trump wins, all of this goes away. And his ability to abuse power without restraint will be magnified. And that is exactly what Joe Biden said today. And it's exactly the case that should be made against Donald Trump. Now, how many voters are moved one way or the other? Swing voters, that's going to be the
I don't think that applies. My opinion. That's why I ultimately think, and I thought this out. What you're a Biden guy, you're going to say, "Oh my God, what a terrible, terrible performance! I'm going to vote for Trump." It's not. That's not going to. Just as Trump voters are not going to vote. I don't think. I don't think. I know Trump voters aren't. Geez, I rethought this. I'm going to vote for Biden. That ain't going to happen either. Ultimately, this is a matter of a few states, who turn the. We're in obviously an electoral process is not the same as a popular vote process. Real quick, and then I'm going to let you go because I know you got a lot on your plate here.
It's always a pleasure to appear with you.
Thank you. Checks in the mail. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. By the way, that's a stupid statement because nobody gets checks anymore. But anyway, Gavin Newsom, he's been all over the country and they've been asking him from his standpoint. And I know this, there's no way he gets involved in this. He's going to be president in 2028. Doesn't need this part.
He's unless, and let me just point out, unless Kamala Harris,
no, there's no
president, is elected, or is, God forbid, something happens to Joe Biden and they're reelected.
As an incumbent.
You will not see a challenge to an incumbent president. And Gavin Newsom has made that crystal clear. He will not challenge Kamala Harris.
Well, I did think about that, but I just think she's so non-beloved by the American public. I think she's perceived as kind of a lightweight, even though she substance-wise is not. But she doesn't come across well. I didn't take that in.
We're talking here not about who wins. The question of challenging an incumbent president.
No, I realize that.
The last time an incumbent president.
I think I got this. Can I try to answer this without looking at anything off the top of my head?
The last time
Ted Kennedy, right?
President was challenged. No. The last time an incumbent president was challenged and lost the nomination was Chester Alan Arthur.
Okay.
Okay. The James G. Blake.
I thought you were. Why did I think Ted Kennedy in 1980?
Because he challenged, but he didn't win.
That's right. Yeah.
Just like Ronald Reagan challenged Gerald Ford in '76 and didn't win.
That's right. Yeah. And Ted Kennedy, I may add, and this has not been pointed out. Well, it has been. I'm going to point it out. He had that disastrous interview, which I know you remember, with Roger Mudd. And
Roger Mudd simply asked the question, why do you want to be president? And Teddy Kennedy could not answer the question. It was a disaster.
Total disaster.
Mudd was a friend.
Yep.
The interview was done at Hyannisport.
John, I watched it and I said, this is the end of Ted Kennedy. And this was, obviously before the internet and all that. Was one of the worst interviews. And they called that Ted Kennedy's political Chappaquiddick. But yeah, it was one of those moments that.
But let me remind you, even after that interview, Teddy Kennedy won the primaries in New York and in California and remained a formidable contender right up to the convention. He didn't have the votes to win, but his speech at the Democratic Convention of 1984 was a classic, a brilliant political speech.
Yeah, it was, at the time, I remember that, as I said, I remember that interview and, I remember the address he made at that famous hall in Boston and,
But if I can bring it back to
please.
The important
I got no time limit.
Well, the important thing about Biden is that he now has to establish his own credibility. There has to be a belief by the American people that Joe Biden can, in fact, carry the day. And we'll have to see how that goes. By the way, I was mistaken. The famous Teddy Kennedy speech was in 1980. I think I said 84.
Yeah, 80. At Fano in Massachusetts.
No, it was the New York Democratic Convention.
Oh, I was talking about, maybe I was thinking about his announcement that he would run was at the the famous hall in Boston. I don't know how to pronounce it. Faneuil or Faneuil Hall. But in any event, that whole God, we all knew at the time that Jimmy Carter was.
But now the question becomes, as much as I love political history, can Joe Biden recover from a disastrous debate? And the answer is yes. And the best example of that, as I just pointed out, was Ronald Reagan in 1984, who lost the first debate, came back and won the second.
Right.
We have another debate in September. And let me tell you, more people will watch it in September because the drama will be so high. Let me also point out, we have in the next couple of weeks an announcement that will come from Donald Trump about who his choice for vice president.
Who do you think that's going to be? Any thoughts on that or any idea who?
Well, the favorites are all very clear. And J.D. Vance of Ohio is, to me, the outstanding candidate.
Right.
Why? Because Ohio is a swing state. And J.D. Vance, who was once critical of Trump, is now fully supportive. But the other person that I always think of is Elise Stefanik, who is
the New York Congresswoman, right? Yeah.
Right, and number 3 Republican in the House. The problem with Marco Rubio, and everybody talks about Marco Rubio, you can't have a candidate for president and vice president from the same state.
Right.
And they're both from Florida. The question is, could Marco Rubio change states? It's not like Dick Cheney, who didn't hold any office in 2000, and who changed his voter registration at the last minute from Texas to Wyoming. Marco Rubio is the elected United States Senator from Florida, and I don't think he wants.
I don't think that helps Trump, number one, because it's Florida. He's probably going to win. I think it's Tim Scott. I may be wrong on that, but because of the fact that
the only person that Donald Trump talked about positively in the debate, or the joint appearance, as I prefer to call it, was Tim Scott.
Tim Scott gives him a little bit of the black vote. It's a key state, even though it's the Carolina, but or is it North Carolina? Am I thinking, or South Carolina?
Tim Scott is
South Carolina. Yeah, I think it's going to be Tim Scott, and he takes it, and he could, whatever. So this is going to be an interesting election. It's going to be something. I mean, we said that about 2020 before all of this, and now we have all these other outstanding factors in place. And it's going to be a wild. I think John. Yeah.
Election to me is important, and every
election is
pivotal. This election is as pivotal as one can be. The American people will have a chance to choose whether they will go with Donald Trump and his view of America, or Joe Biden and the Democrats and their view of America.
Hey, real quick, I don't want to cut you off, but I just did cut you off. Do you see any possible? Well, I'm so used to now getting time clocks, and I'm looking around. Do you see any possibility of any trouble of the Democratic convention of all places? You want to talk about God's symbolic oasis is Chicago. With all what's going on, we got the Middle East situation. We have, and I think there's going to be protests at the Republican convention first too. That's the first convention.
It will not be as massive, and I want to tell you, yes, in Chicago, I know that if the Middle East conflict continues, there will be a massive presence by those who oppose the Biden policy of support for Israel. And we all understand that, and Chicago evidently is gearing up for that.
Right.
The Republicans, it's less controversial. And because it's in Milwaukee, there's less opportunity for that kind of massive protest.
Yeah, Milwaukee, which, I don't know about Wisconsin. They're perceived as a liberal state, yet they have very, very pronounced Republican sort of overtones. I don't know if I just tried.
Wisconsin has been a swing state for years.
Mm-hmm.
And having worked in many Wisconsin primary races, I can tell you it's a fascinating state, and it depends where you live as to whether you're a liberal or a conservative.
I like your use of the term "fascinating state," but anyway, look, I asked you for like 5 minutes, and you've gone way over. So look, to be continued. We'll watch all of this, and hope to get you back on my show as the events dictate and so forth. And I thank you for appearing very much right out of the bat. I gave you a call, and you came out.
It's my pleasure. Let me remind people I do have a
Yeah, why don't you plug that and everything else you want to plug?
It is called Around the Political World with John Rothman. There is no charge. I do 10 minutes Monday through Friday every day on the state of the political world. I'm also now doing a feature on local San Francisco issues, a podcast on the voice of San Francisco. So you can hear me every day talking about these issues, and to me it's very important. And Rich, thank you for inviting me, and it's always a pleasure.
Well, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. You're always terrific analysis and interesting, and you certainly know how to give an opinion that is based upon your expertise. So I'm honored to have you on. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Rich.
All right. That's John Rothman, who used to be on KGO. He's all over the place, a noted presidential historian, political observer, and we talked about the Monday Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity and also the status of President Joe Biden versus Donald Trump in the election. Hey, thanks for watching, and we'll see you later, alligator.